Okay.
Hello, everybody. I'm Matan, part of the reading group. I'm here with.
With Lucas, also known as
Yep.
Awesome. Hello. And we are going to
And
do the first part of the fifth chapter. All's well that ends well.
mhm. And when you say the first part, I suppose we'll just go and we'll see. What time allows.
Mm-hmm. Sure. But
With
it's
that being said, let's get right into it. You mind if I start us off?
yeah, sure, go for it, man.
Wait, can you talk a little bit? I think.
Yeah,
Hello.
yeah. You lost me.
Okay. Well, this is okay. Never mind. I'm ready to start. Okay. Sorry about that. Uh,
Let's go. Let's go.
Part one. Why should a dialectician learn to count to four? The subsection is called the triad and its excess. How far must a Hegelian dialectician learn to count? Most of the interpreters of Hegel, not to mention his critics, tried to convince us in unison that the right answer reads to three, the dialectical triad, and so on. Moreover, they vie with each other in who will call our attention more convincingly to the fourth side, the non-dialecticizable excess, the place of dummy, the place of death of the dummy, in French Le Mort in Bridge, supposedly eluding the dialectical grasp, although or more precisely, insofar as it is the inherent condition of possibility of the dialectical movement, the negativity of a pure expenditure that cannot be sublated, recollected in its result. I really quickly want to just add this. This kind of reminds me of the section on the Hegel's hysterical theater. What the within the historical event, what the subject kind of I don't know fails to notice that is kind of necessary in order for them to retroactively, fulfill their role, fill in their position of enunciation. Uh, that reminds me of this, and then I'll continue. Unfortunately, as is the custom with criticism of Hegel, the trouble with Hegel is here the same as the trouble with Harry and Alfred Hitchcock's film of the same title. He does not consent to his burial so easily. On a closer look, it soon becomes obvious that the supposedly annihilating reproach drawn by the critics from their hats actually forms the crucial aspect of the very dialectical movement. That's to say, a careful reader will immediately recall not only numerous particular cases, like the four types of judgment from the first part of subjective logic, but also the fact that Hegel thematizes a quadruplicity proper to the dialectical movement as such. The excess of the pure nothingness of self relating negativity, which vanishes, becomes invisible in the final result. In the last chapter of his logic, apropos of the elementary matrix of the dialectical process, Hegel points out that the moments of this process could be counted as three or as four, with the subject as the surplus moment which counts for nothing. In this turning point of the method, the course of cognition at the same time returns into itself. As self sublating contradiction, this negativity is the restoration of the first immediacy, of simple universality. For the other of the other, the negative of the negative, is immediately the positive, the identical, the universal. If one insists on counting, this second immediate is, in the course of the method as a whole, the third term to the first immediate and the mediated. It is also, however, the third term to the first or formal negative into absolute negativity or the second negative. Now, as the first negative is already the second term, the term reckoned as third can also be reckoned as fourth, and instead of a triplicity, the abstract form may be taken as a quadruplicity. In this way, the negative or the difference is counted as a duality. And then just for a moment, I would like to look at this footnote for a second.
Yeah, this beginning is really like the part where he talked about Derrida's criticism of Hegel and like how this element, which supposedly is kind of ungraspable for Hegel, is actually the negativity which kickstarts the dialectic. It's also, I don't know, it's interesting. Like, have trouble with locating. I tried to draw this for myself, like where exactly is the moment of the subjectivity, because he talks about the three terms, and if you count the subject, it's four, but it's not immediately obvious for me where is this moment of like pure negativity. But
Well,
I guess we'll get
so,
to it.
so I think I can answer you. I'll try to go quickly, trying to maintain that 70-30 golden ratio or whatever. Um, if you recall in the section on the four judgments, the final judgment, the judgment of notion, it it in a sense it retroactively it kind of pauses itself as having been the 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 self negation of the subject itself,
Mm-hmm.
or the self negating mediation, which kind of served as the impetus for each iteration, which ultimately ended up with the realization that the subject's kind of positing of the big other. I'm switching to Lacanian terms here.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, they're positing of the big other in response to the trauma of the castration of the big other. In a sense, was always something that it seemed like it eluded them, but it was what constituted their subjectivity at that moment.
Mm-hmm.
Alenka Zupancic has this has this very great line that I keep repeating. We cannot say death. Uh, to say that, or we cannot truly conceptualize death. To say death, you must bring it to life symbolically. And on top of that, whenever we try to look at a void and try to associate it with death, instead we see our own libidinal sexuality, which actually reminds me of was another Hitchcock movie, Vertigo. Whenever he's like conceptualizing his death, he's having like those traumatizing flashbacks. It's in a sense reinforcing his own I don't know if you've seen the movie, his own
Yeah.
uh, obsession with I forgot the lady's name, but with his kind of like with his own like phantasmagorical whatever image of her that he's trying to like impose on the real lady. Um,
Mm-hmm.
with that being said, yeah, let's continue. Uh,
You wanted
the
to
first
read
moment
the footnote, or
I wanted to, and then I realized that it was just some the reference to science of logic.
aha?
Yeah,
Yeah,
the
that's
first moment is the immediate positivity of the starting point. The second moment, its mediation is not simply its immediate contrary, its external opposite. It comes forth precisely when we endeavor to grasp the first moment, the immediate in and for itself as such. In this way, we already mediatize it, and I feel like mediate is a better word there, but and imperceptibly, it turns into its own opposite. The second is thus not the negative of the first, its otherness. It is the first moment itself as its own other, as the negative of itself. As soon as we conceive the abstract immediate starting point, as soon as we determine the concrete network of its presuppositions and implications, explicate its content, it changes into its own opposite. The rose is red. Even on the most abstract level, nothingness is not the external opposite of being. This relates to my point about the void, but we arrive at nothingness by simply trying to specify, to determine the content of the notion of being. Herein consists the fundamental dialectical idea of inner negativity. An entity is negated, passes over into its opposite as a result of the development of its own potential. Uh,
yeah,
and you mind taking over from here?
yeah, yeah. Like this is interesting mm, because of like the distinction of outside, outside, and inside, outside. Now I thought about it, like because like his this second moment is basically yeah what he said. The first moment when it develops its own potential, and I wonder if he talks about form or content here because then it's important in the chapter. But yeah, we can go on basically. Fascism, to take a worn out example, is not an external opposite to liberal democracy, but has its roots in liberal democracy's own inner antagonisms. This is why negativity must be counted twice. Effectively, to negate the starting point, we must negate its own inner negation, in which its content comes to its truth. Fascism although opposed to liberal capitalism, is not its effective negation, but only its inner negation. Effectively, to negate liberal capitalism, we must therefore negate its very negation. This second self-relating negation, this, as Hegel would put it, otherness reflected into itself, is the vanishing point of absolute negativity, of pure difference. The paradoxical moment which is third, since it is already the first moment which passes over into its own other. What we have here could also be conceptualized as a case of retroactive determination. When opposed to its radical negative, the first moment itself changes retroactively into its opposite. Capitalism in itself is not the same as capitalism as opposed to communism. When confronted with the tendencies of its dissolution, capitalism is forced to negate itself from within, to pass into fascism if it is to survive. This dialectics was articulated by Adorno apropos of the history of music. The means and forms of musical composition discovered later concern and change the traditional means and above all the forms of interdependence that they constitute. Every tritone used today by a composer already sounds as the negation of the dissonances liberated in the meantime. It no longer possesses its former immediacy, but it is something historically mediated. Therein consists its own opposition. When this opposition, this negation, is passed over in silence, every tritone of this kind, every traditionalist move, becomes an affirmative, convulsively confirming lie, equal to the talking about a happy world customary in other domains of culture. There is no primordial sense to be re-established in music.
Mhm.
And I
You
have
know,
some notes
this
here.
this reminds me of like I don't know, maybe you had a place that you would on your commute to work or something you would pass over in silence, but maybe you meet a girl there one day and you have this entire relationship and then you break up and then you're going back to work one day and then you look at the same exact spot and it means something else.
Like
It's almost
this retroactive determination would be like this place seemed to you like immediately obvious, and then you meet a girl and break up with her, and then retroactively this first immediate place actually passes over into the second moment of its inner like contradiction, that you see that it was a place in at work, but it already had in itself the potential to become this like uh, place with a lot of memories which are bad and stuff.
well put.
Something like this, maybe. And this
Um,
self-relating negativity is interesting because I never truly understood what this means, and like basically what this means is that you negate the negation which is inherent to a thing. It's interesting.
you negate the negation, but not in the sense that you end up at the same exact spot. You rather it require you required that negation in order to kind of like understand the initial position in a new light. Um, for instance, I think the maybe jumping ahead a little bit to the vanishing mediator and fascism. I think Zizek mentioned this earlier, maybe chapter two or something.
Mm-hmm.
Fascism isn't just liberalism gone wrong. It speaks to some like obscene enjoyment at the heart of like liberal symbolic law.
Yeah.
You know.
Mm-hmm. So
Mhm.
it's like it exists already from the start within capitalism, but you can only like clearly see it after it's opposed to communism. That like
Yeah.
retroactively you can see that from the start there was the potential to become fascistic, and like there was no moment. In this moment it went wrong. Like no, it was wrong from the start, but only potentially.
Mhm. If you don't mind, I'll take over from here.
Go.
Here we have an exemplary case of what structuralism calls determination by absence, the logic of determinate negation. That was my own personal note. I'll continue now reading. After the advent of dissonances, the meaning of the tritone changes. Since its further use implies the negation of dissonances, its new meaning results from the way the very absence of dissonances is present in the use of the original tritone. In its immediate presence, the tritone remains the same. Its historical mediation is revealed by the fact that it changes precisely insofar as one chooses to have it remain the same. I'll read the footnote here, footnote 3. The complementary reverse of this paradox is, of course, that things must change if they are to remain the same. Capitalism is forced to revolutionize its material conditions precisely in order to maintain the same fundamental relations of production. Herein consists also the falsity, I'm not in the footnote anymore, of today's call for a return to traditional values. Insofar as we reestablish these values, they are no longer the same, since they legitimize the social order, which is their very opposite.
Can we stop
And once
here?
again, there's another foot.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, please.
If you can read the footnote, maybe that would be good.
Yeah. Footnote 4. Hence follows the ultimate incompatibility of Hegelian procedure with recent postmodernist attempts to oppose to totalitarian, monological, repressive, universalizing reason the contours of another plural, polycentric, dialogical, feminine, baroque, etc. reason, the weak thought, for example. From the Hegelian perspective, such a move is simply superfluous. It is already the first reason which reveals itself as its own opposite, as soon as we endeavor to grasp it in itself as such. And then I'm once again returning to the main text. We can see now how the supplementary element emerges. As soon as we add to the immediate its negation, this negation retroactively changes the meaning of immediacy. So we must count to three, although what we effectively have are just two elements. Or if we envisage the complete cycle of the dialectical process, there are just three positive moments to count over: the immediacy, its mediation, and the final return to the mediated immediacy. What we lose is the unfathomable surplus of the pure difference, which counts for nothing. My own personal note here: the coffee without milk or coffee without cream, which we needed it to kind of have an idea of some substantial existence within our head in order for the joke or the logical sense to have progressed in the first place. Sorry, I'll continue. The unfathomable surplus of the pure difference, which counts for nothing, although it makes the entire process go. This void of the substance, which is at the same time the receptacle for all and everything, as Hegel put it.
This point about traditional values, like I had a few like I had trouble to get what he means, and like, is it that like when we try to bring back traditional values, it doesn't work because they are mediated by the fact that we already, as a society, went past them, and like the traditional values only, he mentioned it in the earlier chapter, I think, that like those values were
Yes.
taken as given, and now we just want to use them instrumentally, in a sense, to like
I
in
wouldn't even say that. I think they were taken as given, but the image of them being taken as given or having been given is revealed as an illusion, which was necessary in order for us to get to this point of disillusionment. Um,
illusion, in the sense that they didn't, that we just think that
like,
they were given, or oh, now that's
so
necessary illusion for
we're
them.
talking.
Okay.
It was an illusion that was necessary from the beginning. I'll put it this way. So the fourth moment that we're having some that it seems to be like the main point he's trying to drive home here is that reality itself is like non-substantial. We start from that position, so identity, like traditional identity, is already a failed modality of being. It's by its constitution failed. So when we try to go back to tradition, it's actually an imitation of an imitation. And so there's like it's essentially like there's it's referring to like a nothing, a
Mm-hmm.
zero, which for us is like our the 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 without cream or without milk, which entirely depends on our own like interpolation within society.
Oh, maybe now I had this because the analogy with the Triton. So the Triton does not change. What changes is the like symbolic mm, structure within it lays, and maybe this is. He says that it's false
We the
because like
the
the
tradition. Oh,
we
sorry.
we want to keep the values the same, but yeah, exactly. We want to keep the values the same because the society around it changed, and like this is this.
The change
Yeah.
that took place, the change that took place was essentially the revelation that that it never existed in the first place, but it never existed as an absence, that a positive absence, which can't really be related to anymore. And even when it was related to in its original primacy, it was in a sense the impetus of what caused it to be lost in the first place, you know?
Oh, okay.
It's like trying to put
Yeah.
toothpaste back in the tube. Yeah.
Hmm.
Um, I forget who's. Would you mind taking over from Protestantism, Jacobinism?
Let's go. Let's go.
Yeah.
Protestantism, Jacobinism. Such ruminations, however, are of a purely formal nature, in the best tradition of the exasperating abstract reflections on dialectical method. What they lack is the inner relatedness to a concrete historical content. That's good stuff. As soon as we move to this level, the idea of a fourth surplus moment as vanishing mediator between the second moment, the split, the abstract opposition, and the final result, reconciliation, immediately acquires concrete contours. So this is where the vanishing mediator is between the second moment and the fourth moment of like, yeah, sorry, I continue. One has only to think of the way Frederick Jameson, in his essay on Max Weber, articulates the notion of vanishing mediator, apropos of Weber's theory of the role of Protestantism in the rise of capitalism. This theory is usually read as, and was also meant by Weber himself to be, a criticism of the Marxist thesis of the primacy of economic infrastructure. Ultimately, Weber's point is that Protestantism was a condition of capitalism. Jameson, on the contrary, interprets Weber's theory as fully compatible with Marxism, as the elaboration of the dialectical necessity by means of which, in feudalism's passage into capitalism, the normal relationship of base and superstructure is inverted. Wherein precisely consists this dialectical necessity? In other words, how specifically does Protestantism create conditions for the emergence of capitalism? Not, as one would expect, by limiting the reach of religious ideology, by undermining its all pervasive presence characteristic of medieval society, but on the contrary, by universalizing its relevance. Luther was opposed to cloisters and church as an institution apart, separated by a gap from the rest of society, because he wanted the Christian attitude to penetrate and determine our entire secular everyday life. Contrary to the traditional pre Protestant stance, which basically limits the relevance of religion to the aims towards, towards which we must tend, while leaving the means, the domain of secular economic activity, to non religious common judgment, the Protestant work ethic conceives the very secular activity, economic acquisitiveness, as the domain of the disclosure of God's grace. This shift can be exemplified by the changed place of asceticism. In the traditional Catholic universe, asceticism concerns a stratum of people separated from everyday secular life, devoted to representing in this world its beyond, the heaven on earth, saints, monks with their abstinence. Whereas Protestantism requires of every Christian to act ascetically in his secular life, to accumulate wealth instead of spending it thoughtlessly, to live in temperance and modesty. In short, to accomplish his instrumental economic activity with God in mind. asceticism as the affair of a stratum apart thereby becomes superfluous. You
Mhm.
want to take over?
And this, yeah, and then basically this the reason that Jameson says that Weber's thesis here is compatible with Marxism, despite in a sense kind of like shifting the primacy away from the economic realm to the political realm, is precisely because it's the move that the Protestants do is to kind of like is to give them the sort of distance in order to like wonder what to do with their lives. And I'll take this quote from the essay that's a little bit later. To wonder what to do with your life is already to commit yourself in advance to a certain ontological dissatisfaction with any of the ultimate possibilities. And basically, I think I don't want to get too much into it, but he essentially like kind of redoubles the his thesis of the vanishing mediator of Protestantism into the misrecognition that Weber has of anxiety that stems from ennui, which was very relevant to his own, neuroticism, and was like the focal point of his,
From what?
I'm getting a little bit too big for my britches here,
No, no,
but
because you
he,
said from something and Henri?
oh, Ennui. And basically, the quote that I said from
Ah.
Jameson,
Mm-hmm.
he's basically saying like the pain of losing like a tradition or a way of life, the pain that the Protestants felt that they had experienced at the this is we're getting way past the 70-30 ratio, but I don't care. I'll keep going. Um, and losing like the true core, the true ethical core of Christianity,
Mm-hmm.
it in a sense put them in a position of ennui in which like eventually their move and response, which was to kind of place primacy on uh, the secularization of the state, but in order to have it kind of implicitly within its own, I don't know, unwritten rules, follow the Christian doxa.
Huh.
It put them in. It put. I'm jumping ahead here. It put the position. It gave way to the position that the Jacobins eventually were in which they didn't this traditional like ethical core or whatever that was missing, that had been registered as a definite loss by the Protestants, had now been given way to a has now given way to a sense in which the original coordinates of the loss have been lost themselves. So the environment itself is perceived as nothing, which gives way to an anxiety of having to build something within the political structure itself, or the economic structure itself, right? Which
Mm-hmm.
is how which I guess was a poorly explained way of how the Protestants actually I guess the affirmation of Jameson's thesis that Weber uh was mistaken, and that his own thesis perfectly aligned with Marxism. That was way too drawn out, but let's continue.
No, that was very interesting.
Yeah,
I don't think I understood it, but like,
I think it was a mistake on my part to even try to like I don't know, flex or whatever by
no,
bringing it
let's
up.
go, let's go.
Yeah. We were at this
Yes,
universalization
yes,
of the
yes.
Christian stance. The affirmation of its relevance for secular economic activity generates the attributes of the Protestant work ethic, compulsive work and accumulation of wealth, renunciation to consumption as an end in itself, simultaneously, yet unknowingly and unintentionally, following the cunning of reason, it opens the way to the devaluation of religion, to its confinement to the intimacy of a private sphere separated from state and public affairs. Interesting slip. The Protestant universalization of the Christian stance is thus merely a transitory stage in the passage to the normal state of bourgeois society where religion is reduced to means, to a medium enabling the subject to find new strength and perseverance in the economic fight for survival. Like those techniques of self experience, which put the encounter of our true self in the service of our fitness. It is, of course, easy to assume an ironic distance towards the Protestant illusion and to point out how the final result of Protestant endeavors to abolish the gap between religion and everyday life was the debasement of religion to a therapeutic mean. What is far more difficult is to conceive the necessity of Protestantism as the vanishing mediator between medieval corporatism and capitalist individualism. In other words, the point not to be missed is that one cannot pass from medieval closed society to bourgeois society immediately without the intercession of Protestantism as vanishing mediator. It is Protestantism which, by means of its universalization of Christianity, prepares the ground for its withdrawal into the sphere of privacy. In the political domain, a similar role was played by Jacobinism, which can even be determined as political Protestantism. Jacobinism universalizes the democratic political ideological project in the same way. It does not grasp it as a mere formal political principle without immediate bearing on economic, family, etc. relations, but endeavors to make the democratic egalitarian project into a principle structuring the totality of social life. The trap into which Jacobinism fell is also the same. Unknowingly, its political radicalism prepared the way for its opposite, for the bourgeois universe of egotistic and acquisitive individuals who care not a pin for egalitarian moralism. Here, too, it is easy to assume an ironic distance and point out how the Jacobins, by means of their violent reduction of the social totality to the abstract principle of equality, necessarily finished in the opposite, in terrorism, since this reduction is resisted by the ramified network of concrete relations that characterize civil society. See Hegel's classical criticisms of the Jacobin and Phenomenology of Spirit. What is far more difficult to accomplish is to demonstrate why no immediate passage was possible from the ancien regime to the egotistic bourgeois everyday life. Why? Precisely because of their illusory reduction of social totality to the democratic political project. The Jacobins were a necessary, vanishing mediator. Therein, not in the commonplaces about the utopian terrorist character of the Jacobinical project, consists the effective point of Hegel's criticism. In other words, it is easy to detect in Jacobinism the roots and the first form of modern totalitarianism. It is far more difficult and disquieting to acknowledge and assume fully the fact that without the Jacobinical excess, there would be no normal pluralist democracy. Um, let me just see if there's a footnote here. There is, so I will just. It's quite long. What is unusual about Jameson's text is that it does not mention the role of Weber himself as the vanishing mediator between the traditional approach to society and 20th century sociology as objective science. I actually totally disagree with this. Because the point I was making earlier, because in fact I think it's actually quite like obvious that he does do this because that it's his first point is to kind of like relate Weber's entire substitution with the of the economic with the political
Yeah.
as his own role as the vanishing mediator of like sociology or whatever. But
Okay.
it's like 40 pages long. I don't think we'd be able to get into it here, so I really encourage anyone who wants to read through it. Lots of interesting information, relating to Nietzsche, all that stuff. Okay,
Zizek probably didn't
crap, I
read
lost my
it.
spot.
He like
Okay, yeah, sorry.
probably.
I'll just start from the beginning with that. What is unusual about Jameson's text is that it does not mention the role of Weber himself as the vanishing mediator between the traditional pre-positivist approach to society and 20th century sociology as objective science. As Jameson points out, Weber's notion of Weltfreiheit, of a value-free stance, is not yet the later positivist neutrality. It expresses a pre-positivist Nietzschean attitude of distance towards values, which enables us to accomplish a transvaluation of values and thus a more efficient intervention into social reality. In other words, Weltfreiheit implies a very interested attitude towards reality. In that case, I do agree. Jameson does not make this like explicit, but it is like obvious. Incidentally, does not Wittgenstein play the same role in contemporary analytical philosophy? Is he not even a double vanishing mediator in relation to classical logical positivism as well as in relation to speech acts theory? A simple sensitivity to theoretical finesse tells us that the most valuable aspect of Wittgenstein's Tractatus gets lost with its systematization in logical positivism. That surplus with which Bertrand Russell some guy named Carnap and others did not know what to do and dismissed as confusion or mysticism the problem of form as unspeakable and of silence, which inscribes the subject of enunciation into the series of propositions and so on. And it is similar with the codification of speech acts in Searle et al. We lose a series of paradoxes and borderline questions from the paradoxical status of objective certainty, which cannot be put in doubt, although it is not necessarily true, to the splitting of the subject of speech acts, the radical discontinuity between I and the proper name. So that was footnote 6.
Yeah, so this would
Um,
relate to what he talks about later, like that Wittgenstein has some disturbing element in him, which later is normalized into a normal pluralist democracy, I guess.
which ties into I think our point earlier of like the hidden obscene like core of liberalism, which gave way to fascism. Um,
Yeah,
you mind taking over from here? That is to
sure,
say,
sure.
yeah.
That is to say, the illusion into which Protestantism and Jacobinism are enmeshed is much more complicated than may seem on a first approach. It does not consist simply in the naive moralistic universalization of the Christian or egalitarian democratic project, that is, in their overlooking the concrete wealth of social relations that resist such an immediate universalization. Their illusion is far more radical. It is of the same nature as the illusion of all historically relevant political utopias, the illusion to which Marx drew attention apropos of Plato's state, when he remarked that Plato did not see how what he effectively described was not a not yet realized ideal, but the very fundamental structure of the existing Greek state. In other words, utopias are utopian not because they depict an impossible ideal, a dream not for this world, but because they misrecognize the way their ideal state is already realized in its basic content, in its notion, as Hegel would say. Protestantism becomes superfluous. It can vanish as a mediator the moment the very social reality is structured as a Protestant universe. The notional structure of capitalist civil society is that of a world of atomized individuals, defined by the paradox of acquisitive asceticism. The more you possess, the more you must renounce consumption. That is to say, the structure of the Protestant content without its positive religious form. And it is the same with Jacobinism. What the Jacobins overlooked is the fact that the ideal after which they strove was, in its notional structure, already realized in the dirty acquisitive activity, which appeared to them as the betrayal of their high ideals. Vulgar, egotistic bourgeois everyday life is the actuality of freedom, equality, and brotherhood. Freedom of free trade, formal equality in the eyes of law, and so on. The illusion proper to the vanishing mediators, Protestants, Jacobins, is precisely that of the Hegelian beautiful soul. They refuse to acknowledge, in the corrupted reality over which they lament, the ultimate consequence of their own act, as Lacan would put it, their own message in its true inverted form. And our illusion as sobered inheritors of Protestantism and Jacobinism is no less. We perceive those vanishing mediators as aberrations or excesses, failing to notice how we are nothing but Jacobins without the Jacobinical form, nothing but Protestants without the Protestant form. This thing about utopias is so interesting. So like what the utopian doesn't see is that like he has a different form to his thought, but the content is already present. It's interesting. Maybe
Yeah,
we,
because
yeah,
it relies on like a I don't know if we're to use like Jamesonian terms, like a cognitive mapping based off like your interpolated view of these determinate negations. the negation these negations which have like popped up or not popped up because negations don't pop up, they're subtracted, which have been subtracted based off these like vanishing mediators. So basically when he says our illusion as sobered inheritors of Protestantism and Jacobinism is no less. We perceive those vanishing mediators as aberrations or excesses, failing to notice how we are nothing but Jacobins without the Jacobinical form, nothing but Protestants without the Protestant form. And it's precisely in the way we like utopianize that kind of like I
Okay,
think.
okay, okay, okay. Now I get it. So we are like equality, freedom, stuff like that, and yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
but then when it comes to like how we actually, I don't know, rhetorically like talk about these things, Zizek makes this point a lot. It's always like it's always phrases like shaming others for their like consumption decision, the way they consume, not the actual form of consumption itself, which structures our society. Like did you recycle? Did you, I don't know, eat organic, whatever?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You know what confuses me? This is maybe because I'm not so good with this, but like, I I understand form and content in the sense of society. So like the superstructure, ideology, and like content would be the concrete relations which construct like our actual material life. But in the sense of like, what is the Jacobinical form? You know, like universalizing the like yeah, what he said before, like not treating the ideology as an abstract, but just trying to make it the principle of the of whole society. Maybe this is the Jacobinical form.
The Jacobin specific, I mean, I'm no good with like history, and I'm
Yeah, yeah,
fairly
sure.
a novice to Marxism. Actually, you know what? I won't answer this. I'll leave this to the viewer, um, because I don't know myself. I'll have to look into it.
Yeah.
Um, and other vanishing mediators. This gap between the form and its notional content offers us also the key to the necessity of the vanishing mediator. The passage from feudalism to Protestantism is not of the same nature as the passage from Protestantism to bourgeois everyday life with its privatized religion. The first passage concerns content under the guise of preserving the religious form or even its strengthening. The crucial shift, the assertion of the ascetic acquisitive stance in economic activity as the domain of the manifestation of grace takes place. Whereas the second passage, this answers your question actually, is a purely formal act, a change of form. As soon as Protestantism is realized as the ascetic acquisitive stance, it can fall off as form. The vanishing mediator therefore emerges because of the way in a dialectical process form stays behind content. First, the crucial shift occurs within the limits of the old form, even taking on the appearance of its renewed assertion. Like the rose is red, and in order to kind of like specify that more, we say the rose is not red. The change is taking place at the level of content rather than form. If we're trying to like use the example from chapter, what was it, 3?
So the
But eventually,
content would
we
be
get to the
the
point.
predicate.
Yes, but then eventually, as we can see, our own like dissatisfaction with finding an answer leads us to kind of like change the our own perception of the form of the subject itself. Hold on.
Okay.
Eventually, well, bringing us all the way to the judgment of notion. Whatever. Did I finish that paragraph? Yes. The vanishing mediator therefore emerges because of the way, in a dialectical process, form stays behind content. First, the crucial shift occurs within the limits of the old form, even taking on the appearance of its renewed assertion, the universalization of Christianity, return to its true content, and so on. Then, once the silent weaving of the spirit finishes its work, the old form can fall off. The double scansion of this process enables us to grasp in a concrete way the worn out formula of the negation of negation. The first negation consists in the slow, underground, invisible change of substantial content, which paradoxically takes place in the name of its own form. Then, once the form has lost its substantial right, It falls to pieces. In Marxist terms, he uses this often. It ossifies by itself. The very form of negation is negated, or to use the classical Hegelian couple, the change which took place in itself becomes for itself. The picture should be complicated even a step further. A closer look reveals the presence of two vanishing mediators in the passage from feudal to bourgeois political structure: the absolute monarchy and Jacobinism. Just as some background, you had a bunch in feudalism. You had a bunch of these states that really couldn't just in short summary, they really couldn't productively invest the money that they were making, their resources into a concentrated form. And so it took the support of absolute monarchy among the bourgeois in order to kind of have this place over or an excuse in order to in the case of the Netherlands, drain the swamps, and not in the Trumpian sense, like literally drain the swamps with windmills and stuff like that, build cities, etc.
Hmm.
Um, yeah. So two vanishing mediators in the passage from feudal to bourgeois political. The first is the sign, the embodiment of a paradoxical compromise. The political form enabling the rising bourgeois to strengthen its economic hegemony by breaking the economic power of feudalism, of its guilds and corporations. What is paradoxical about it, of course, is the fact that feudalism digs its own grave precisely by absolutizing its own crowning point, by giving absolute power to the monarch. The result of absolute monarchy is thus a political order disconnected from its economic foundation. I like that line. And the same disconnection characterizes Jacobinism. It is already a commonplace to determine Jacobinism as a radical ideology, which takes literally the bourgeois political program of equality, freedom, and brotherhood. What was it? Liberté, égalité, fraternité, and endeavors to realize it, irrespective of the concrete articulation of a civil society. I feel like every time I try to pronounce these French things, I sound like Brad Pitt from
Yeah,
Inglorious
the
Bastards or whatever.
equality.
Arrivederci, arrivederci.
They actually
Both
have
pay
it on.
dearly.
They actually have it in high schools in France, like liberté, égalité. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, both pay dearly for their illusion. The absolute, although arrivederci is Italian, I know the difference. I'm just saying that I was just poking fun at
Yeah, yeah,
myself.
you are
Both pay
racist.
dearly for their illusion. The absolute monarch noticed too late that society praised him as almighty only to allow one class to oust another. The Jacobins also became superfluous once their job of destroying the apparatus of the Ancien regime was done. Both were carried away by the illusion of the autonomy of the political sphere. Both believed in their political mission. One in the unquestionable character of royal authority, the other in the pertinence of its political project. And cannot the same be said on another level for fascism and communism, namely actually existing socialism? Is not fascism a kind of inherent self-negation of capitalism, an attempt to change something so that nothing really changes, by means of an ideology which subordinates the economy to the ideological political domain? Is not the Leninist actually existing socialism, a kind of socialist Jacobinism, an attempt to subordinate the whole of socio-economic life to the immediate political regulation of the socialist state? Both are vanishing mediators, but into what? The usual cynical answer from capitalism back to capitalism seems a little bit too easy. You mind taking over from here?
Sure.
Or any questions?
Yeah,
Either way.
because before he said that the passage from like Protestantism, which is different than the passage which Jacobinism makes, and but both of them seem to be initiated by the subject. So like in the case of
Well,
Protestantism, it is the subject who decides that oh no, we need to change the content like under the guise of the same form, and like yeah.
I'll just point out though that he wasn't it was something kind of related. He wasn't talking about Protestantism as the vanishing mediator here. He was talking about absolute monarchy,
Yes, 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 and Jacobinism, yeah.
but yeah, but the absolute monarchy thing relates to Protestantism precisely in it took the 30 Years' War, which kind of in which the Protestantism and absolute monarchy kind of join forces a little bit in order to kind of like figure out how to accumulate capital in an unprecedented scale, whatever. Uh, yeah, whatever.
Yeah,
That's
because
not so
he said
important.
because before he was saying that the what Protestantism does is the content changes and the form stays the same, and then when we pass to bourgeois everyday life, the form falls off. But this is the Jacobin moment, and he. Hmm. I wonder what is the difference, like in the act itself. Like, is there a difference, or this maybe this depends only on the historical moment? So, like, Jacobins basically push for the same as Protestantism, but like because it's later in the process, they make it so that the form falls off.
In the name of the form, in the name of preserving the form, Protestantism kind of utilized these kings in order to these absolute monarchs in order to like kind of justify or implement that their I mean as Zizek said that they're kind of like their social dream of like this private asceticism, but at the same time in the form of like acquisitiveness, um, accumulating large amounts of capital within a short within a concentrated locale, which necessitated this kind of belief in predestination. So it's like, oh, we're justified for doing everything we're doing. We're the chosen or whatever. We are the elect.
Mhm. Mhm.
I'm
Mhm.
sorry. I'm sorry. I feel like I kind of went off topic there.
No, it's
Oh, so
cool.
sorry. No, and then sorry. Okay. And then from there, the Jacobinism in the name of they weren't doing it in the name of like the currently existing form, but they actually like were dismantling. They weren't trying to like they weren't trying to like implement something. They were just trying to destroy something which was getting in the way of like their ideal. So in both cases, there was like this utopic notion, pretty similar.
Oh yeah, so
Um,
Jacobins are the new form, which comes and like they think that the world in which they are, it's like not realizing these ideals, but they don't see that it is, and this is why their moment comes. So like,
well, I think I mentioned this earlier when I was talking about Jameson's essay. So the Protestants they register a loss. So their disposition is more of like the melancholic, where they're like they're more like they're more of like in a state of like romantic like anger or like there's something that they feel like they lost.
mm-hmm,
Whereas with the Jacobins, after the Protestants like actually tried to implement like their worldview and it ended up only further uh I mean for further amplifying all the negative effects which they viewed as like antithetical to their way of life. The original coordinates of that loss was lost itself. So the Jacobins, it was a little bit of a different scenario for them because for them there was I mentioned it before ennui. There was a feeling of like that there was no content within like the form itself, or there was no the form itself was not like justified. Like we
mm-hmm,
know like how things work, but not why. Why are we doing all these things?
mm-hmm,
So there was like a period of ennui of like just general like kind of flatness, not revolt as with the Protestants, but rather non-participation, which gives way to an anxiety at the prospect of having to like build on top of this nothing.
mm-hmm.
Um,
So the picture would be like in feudalism we have the Christian form and the content of feudalism, and then we have Protestantism, which changes the content to like individualism, but we still are in the religious form.
and that in a sense, but the fact that it doesn't work out and it only
Yeah.
again consolidates capital, it in a sense negates the form itself.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But isn't this the moment of Jacobins that like they have to
Yeah, no,
come?
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree.
yeah, 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 yeah.
It's the moment of Jacobins, but with a scansion. There's like a delay in which the coordinates of the loss that was originally felt by the Protestants is not registered as a loss of something negative, but rather as a fundamental condition of life itself.
That's so interesting. maybe this is the, in a way, the negation of the negation. So the loss itself is negated, so that you are like, there was no positive entity here from the beginning. Like we didn't lose anything. Like, and we are so much more lost because of this.
That's exactly how I see it. Yeah, I
Yeah,
agree.
yeah. That's, and it's also, let's go, because then he talks about the base, and this will be interesting, I guess. So we ended at
Hmm.
the, oh my god, the inversion. You want to go?
If you don't mind, can you go right here? I'm gonna
Yeah,
turn
no
my camera off, and I'm
problem.
just gonna fill up my water.
Yeah, that's suspect. The inversion of the normal relationship of content, economic basis, and its ideological form, which renders possible the anti-Marxist reading of Weber, consists therefore in the above described emancipation of form from its content that characterizes the vanishing mediator. The break of Protestantism with the medieval church does not reflect new social content, but is rather the criticism of the old feudal content in the name of the radicalized version of its own ideological form. It is this emancipation of the Christian form from its own social content that opens up the space for the gradual transformation of the old into the new capitalist content. It is easy for Jameson, thus, to demonstrate how Weber's theory of the crucial role of Protestantism in the emergence of capitalism affects only vulgar economism and is quite compatible with the dialectic of base and ideological superstructure, according to which one passes from one social formation to another through a vanishing mediator, which inverts the relationship between base and superstructure. By emancipating itself from its own base, the old superstructure prepares the terrain for the transformation of the base. The classical Marxist theoretical edifice is thus saved. The emancipation of the ideological form is explained from the inner antagonism of the base itself. It emerges when these antagonisms become so violent that they can no longer be legitimized by their own ideological form. And this is
Hmm.
so amazing. So, like, the delay of the form and content is reflected on the level of society, and this thing about the base itself containing inner contradictions which make it so that the form cannot be, but also this should be the moment of the subjective, like, pure nothingness. So maybe the subject is the name for the inner antagonisms of the base, but this wouldn't work, I think, because the source of the movement seems to be at one moment the, like, antagonisms in the base, and but before we talk that this is the decision of a subject, so I
Oh,
don't know.
remember Zizek? He talks a lot about unwritten laws, and how they're kind of used to like mediate the inner antagonism, which kind of it makes it impossible to have fully like real symbolic laws that are fully coherent. And basically, when the form itself can no longer like produce like a way of mediating this like zone between two deaths or whatever, as Zupancic puts it, or as Lacan puts it, um, when the unwritten laws themselves are like openly flouted and things like that, then you're at the point of like Jacobinism or whatever, where you can't. There's no like old form with which to like in the name of try to change the content. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. So the moment of Jacobinism would be the moment when the subject does not.
It's the subjective destitution, yeah, the
Yeah,
subjective
yeah.
destitution you just talked about. But it's not just that; it's the subjective destitution plus the realization that it offers some kind of opportunity
Yeah, and like,
to
but the
build. Yeah,
unwritten laws was so important, because like the subject refuses to recognize those unwritten laws, and he just takes the explicit law, like, not laws, but like the ideas of equality, brotherhood. He takes them on the, like, literally, and does not. It's not like, oh, but we don't really do this in this situation, in this situation. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So this would be the maybe the Jacobinical form that you just take the law on its face. And Zizek talks about this. That is like a radical gesture in some contexts that don't you refuse to follow these like obscene hidden supplements to the law.
Yeah, this exact like a moment, this exact these figures that you've just described. I think Alenka Zupancic's New Antigone book. It perfectly this is like what it's all about.
Mm.
It's a pretty short book. I would recommend it to you, any viewers,
Yeah,
or
okay.
just listen to like her lectures or that video. But whatever. Yeah. No, that was a very good point.
That Alenka book sounds awesome. I haven't read it yet. So we are at the there is an inherent tragical. Oh, do I go? Okay.
I was just silent, hoping that you would do.
No problem. It's cool. There is an inherent tragical ethical dimension proper to this emancipation of the ideological superstructure. It presents a unique point at which an ideology takes itself literally and ceases to function as an objectively cynical legitimization of the existing power relations. Let us mention another, more contemporary case. The new social movements that emerged during the last years of actually existing socialism in Eastern Europe, movements whose exemplary representative is Neues Forum in the former GDR. Groups of passionate intellectuals who took socialism seriously and were prepared to stake everything in order to destroy the compromised system and replace it with the utopian third way beyond capitalism and actually existing socialism. Their sincere belief and the insistence that they were not working for the restoration of Western capitalism, of course, proved to be nothing but an insubstantial illusion. However, we could say that precisely as such, as a thorough illusion without substance, it was strictly speaking non ideological. It did not reflect in inverted ideological form any actual relations of power. So this would be the separation between the superstructure and base. Like in the moment when you believe in your ideology so much that you actually like the king or like Jacobins that you get disconnected from the base and then the base comes back to fuck you up basically. Uh,
I'll continue. You've read quite a bit.
yeah.
At this point, we should correct the Marxist vulgate. Contrary to the commonplace, according to which an ideology becomes cynical, in other words, accepts the gap between words and acts, doesn't believe in itself anymore, is no longer experienced as truth, but treats itself as pure instrumental means of legitimizing power. In the period of the decadence of a social formation, it could be said that precisely the period of decadence opens up to the ruling ideology the possibility of taking itself seriously and effectively opposing itself to its own social base. With Protestantism, the Christian religion opposes feudalism as its social base, just as Nues Forum opposes the existing socialism in the name of true socialism. In this way, unknowingly, it unchains the forces of its own final destruction. Once their job is done, they are overrun by history. Nues Forum polled 3% at the elections, and a new scoundrel time sets in, with people in power who were mostly silent during the communist repression, and who nonetheless now abuse Nues Forum as crypto-communists. A beat of your finger is, however, this reading whereby the vanishing mediator effectively appears as just a mediator, an intermediate figure between two normal states of things, the only one possible. The conceptual apparatus elaborated by post-Marxist political theory, Clau Lefort, Ernesto Laclau, allows for another reading which radically shifts the perspective. Within this field, sorry, one second. Okay. Within this field, the moment of vanishing mediator is the moment defined by Alain Badiou as that of the event in relation to the established structure. The moment when its truth emerges, the moment of openness, which, once the eruption of the event is institutionalized into a new positivity, is lost, or more precisely, becomes literally invisible. According to the well-known commonplace, which, contrary to the usual pattern, is not a stupidity clothed as wisdom, after the fact, backwards, history can always be read as a process governed by laws, as a meaningful succession of stages. However, insofar as we are its agents, embedded, caught in the process, the situation appears, at least during the turning points when something is happening, open, undecidable, far from the exposition of an underlying necessity, we find ourselves confronted with responsibility, the burden of decision pressing upon our shoulders, which, on a like a more contemporary note, I think is kind of it, it kind of relates to our own political position today, in which it seems like at least within like I don't know, like post-industrial capitalism, we kind of like no matter, I mean, it seems like no matter which part of this political spectrum you're on, you almost like there's like a new form of disavowal where you're openly like stating very true, like, I don't know, social injustices. Um, I mean, even like the right today, like the most extreme right, they'll point out like they'll talk about how like what the CIA has done and so and whatever. But in a sense, it's always to kind of like not always, but it's in a sense an attempt to instantiate a big other that is, albeit a malevolent big other, but one which allows you to kind of feel like safe in your position of subjectivity, rather than being in the position of like Jacobinism or whatever, where you kind of like look around you and realize there's not like I mean, I'm not idolizing the Jacobins, but I'm saying that there's like there's a point when you're in like a burning building and you have to realize that you only
So,
have one way out,
but
and that's
how
through
does
the
this move
window.
work? So you disavow, and like let's say like you state openly some atrocities that the CIA does, and you like don't act as though it was terrible, and this would be supposed to like create a big
No, no,
other
you
who.
act as you act as if it's terrible, and you orient your politics around this, but it becomes more than anything like a consumption decision. It further entrenches you within the current order.
Okay, that's what you mean. Yeah.
The
Okay.
form of this,
Okay.
yeah, the
Okay.
form of disavowal itself is fetishized, and I think this is like I think
Oh,
this is the
so you
period.
because you talk about it, but you in your action you actually don't do anything to oppose it.
Yeah, yeah, not only that, in your action, you're kind of like we said there's like an empty core that is at the core of like all subjectivity, all symbolic law,
Hmm.
and you're trying to like put something in that hole in order to avoid confronting the fact that things are like empty.
Yeah, I thought that you were going to talk about like the fact that like there is this spirit of the times when people are uh, like no one knows what will happen, but some people prefer to like Zupancic Alenka talks about it like sometimes a subject prefers to just for example do follow the injunction of the superego in order to suffer the most, but at least he knows or she knows that she will suffer the most because what is most unbearable is like lack of knowledge. Like, what does the other want? I don't know. And you prefer to be like, oh, it will be terrible because in this you have actually something to hold on to, and like we have this thing, and it's connected with this about that people are like, yeah, 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 the world is going to end in young people like me, like in 30 years, and it's fine, we'll die, and it's so weird, like it's so Freudian. They say it, and they don't, they don't look like they internalized it.
Mhm.
Yeah, but
If
whatever.
if you or anyone else is interested, there's this essay by Octave Menoni called Je sais bien mais quand même, I know very well but nevertheless, and it's going to be talked about in I think the last chapter of this book. It goes into this, and Zupancic talks about it as well. But
Is
whatever,
this the
let's
Menoni
continue.
who is in Lacan's seminar, or because there is the dude named Menoni in like first or second seminar?
Hmm.
Yeah, no matter. Let's
Sorry,
continue.
where was I?
Let
Invisible.
us
According
just okay.
I think I was at this part. According to the well-known commonplace, which, contrary to the usual pattern, is not a stupidity clothed as wisdom, after the fact, backwards, history can always be read as a process governed by laws. Oh, no, wait, I just read this. So,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Let us just recall the, you know what? I might as well just finish it. No, never mind. I'm just going to continue. Let us just recall the October Revolution. Retroactively, it is easy to locate it within the wider historical process to show how it emerged out of the specific situation of Russia with its failed modernization and simultaneous presence of islands of modernity, highly developed working class in isolated places. In short, it is not too difficult to compose a sociological treatise on this theme. However, it is sufficient to reread the passionate polemics between Lenin, Trotsky, the Mensheviks, and other participants to find oneself face to face with what is lost in such an objective historical account. The burden of decision is a situation which, so to speak, forced the agents to invent new solutions and make unheard of moves without any guarantee in general laws of historical development. The impossible moment of openness constitutes the moment of subjectivity. Subject is a name for that unfathomable X called upon, suddenly made accountable, thrown into a position of responsibility, into the urgency of decision in such a moment of undecidability. This is the way one has to read Hegel's proposition that the true is to be grasped not only as substance, but equally as subject, not only as an objective process governed by some hidden rational necessity, even if this necessity assumes the Hegelian shape of the cunning of reason, but also as a process punctuated, scanned by the moments of openness, undecidability when the subject's irreducibly contingent act establishes a new necessity. According to a well-known doxa, the dialectical approach enables us to penetrate the surface play of contingencies and reach the underlying rational necessity which runs the show behind the subject's back. A proper Hegelian dialectical move is almost the exact inversion of this procedure. It disperses the fetish of objective historical process and allows us to see its genesis, the way the very historical necessity sprang up as a positivization, as a coagulation of a radically contingent decision of the subjects in an open, undecidable situation. That sentence rolls off the tongue really nicely. Dialectical necessity is always, by definition, a necessity après coup. A proper dialectical account calls into question the self evidence of what actually took place and confronts it with what did not take place. That is, it considers what did not happen, a series of missed opportunities, of alternative histories, a constituent part of what effectively happened. The dialectical attitude towards the problematic of the possible worlds is therefore more paradoxical than it may seem, since what goes on now in our reality is the result of a series of radically contingent acts. The only way to define our actual world properly is to include in its definition the negation of the possible worlds contained in its position. Our lost opportunities are part of what we are. They qualify it in all meanings of the word. Well, and I think this offers like a really radically different way of interacting with politics than what we're used to, which is, again, we oftentimes like assert, you know, so and so is doing wrong, or what's wrong with society, what's causing things to like, decay. But this, in a sense, is an attempt to position us as the subject supposed to know, right? And if a person were to take seriously their claims of these malevolent forces, which kind of structure our society in such a way which makes like resistance impossible or whatever, if you were to take that really seriously, wouldn't you then say that your own ability to enunciate that position is kind of like contradicts your very claim, or throws some considerable like doubt upon it? Because if that was the case, you wouldn't have this opportunity to like question how things are in the first place.
Oh yeah. You couldn't say that this is necessary because you wouldn't have the concept of it couldn't have it could have been different. We can
Mhm.
read this to the end because this part about possible worlds, like I tried to get my mind around it and it's hard, but it's interesting.
Well, Zizek, I'll just
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
add this. I hear him often in lectures or interviews. He says he'll like point at like failed revolutions, failed revolts, like the Spartacus revolts or whatever. And his point is that like they don't necessarily have to be failed. They could be considered as part of a lineage,
It's
which kind of
Benjamin's
like
point. Benjamin is like, we have to
I think
redeem
he
the
literally
revol.
yeah he literally takes it from Benjamin. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and
Could you
like
elaborate? I'm actually
this
curious.
is because I think it relates to this, but this is not the same. So like what he talked about in the previous paragraph about like the ha 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 necessity. I don't know. I will just talk about it. So what he means is that, and what Benjamin I think means, but I don't know. I haven't read him, so is that like all of those revolutions they failed, and what we he's Hegelian about this like these failures they if something else happens in the future and we see that these previous revolutions maybe even in this way that we talked about in this chapter that like they revolutionized the base they changed society they were necessary so that another revolution could take place which would succeed and in the moment it succeeded we would be like okay it was necessary those failures actually were like it's reconciliation we didn't this failure was actually good because it led to our situation right now and I think it kind of relates to the possible worlds thing, but I'm not sure I can elaborate on this. So, but uh,
Okay.
it's not necessary to understand this like determination by absence for this, at least. I think,
Mhm.
yeah. Maybe his point is much more like refined, but I wrote about it like last year, and I couldn't find like him writing on this. So I don't know. Maybe it's in some lecture.
Mhm.
Yeah. But it basically relates to this retroactivity and necessity. So like once the next thing happens, we see that it was necessary for the past revolutions to fail. So like here we go. And like if another so like communism arises, we can see that the fall of the Soviet Union was actually like a failure, but thanks to it, like we could have actually existing communism, like good one, possibly. So
Mhm.
so maybe I could finish the paragraph about the possible worlds. Uh,
Yeah, we were at yet our horizon of reading.
okay. Yet our horizon of reading the past is determined by the contingent acts we made, and which enforce the retroactive illusion of necessity. For this reason, it is impossible for us to occupy a neutral position of pure meta language, from which we could overview all the possible worlds. This means that, since the only way to define our own actual world is in terms of its negative relationship to its alternatives, we cannot ever determine the world we actually live in. In other words, to carry the paradox to its extreme, of course, only one world was really possible, namely the one in which we actually live. But since the position of a neutral observer is not accessible to us, we don't know which this world is. We don't know in which of the possible worlds we actually live. This point is not that we will never learn what opportunities we lost, but rather that we will never really know what we got. Extreme as this position may appear, is it not discernible in the everyday phrase we use to designate somebody who is unaware of how lucky he was to miss a series of possible catastrophes? He doesn't know his own luck. If dialectics does not also mean this, then all the talk about substance as subject is ultimately null, and we are back at reason as substantial necessity, pulling the strings behind the stage. Now this is crazy. Because what I understand is like is determination but by absence again. So like the we only know what happened if we say what didn't happen and like it is the and ah, it's crazy.
Yeah, and I really like this kind of like the attempt to kind of the science the attempt of science to grasp the world. I think this is his point, and I'm trying to relate this to Jameson, who I've barely read, and I'm just starting to get into based off his essay. is that the world itself takes on in its immediacy the form of allegory
Mm-hmm.
rather than as a like taxonomy or something like that.
Allegory in what
Um,
sense?
in the same sense that like an allegory is just kind of like presented to you and you're just sort of tasked with never mind. I don't know. I'm getting
Okay,
too
I
big.
get it.
I'm
So
getting ahead of
like
myself here.
you can, it's more of a thing which with which you can work and like okay.
I'm a little bit too eager to use these Jamesonian terms without knowing fully what he means by them. So I think
Because
I
they
won't
are
go
very
past that.
cool. Because like cognitive mapping, man, like I wouldn't never thought about that. Like,
Yeah. No, yeah, I just dropped that earlier without even really knowing what he means. Um,
yeah,
uh, did you finish that paragraph? Yeah, you did.
yeah. I'm trying to think how it connects with necessity. So like because he says that what really makes it so that we cannot make an objective judgment about what happened is that acts we made and which enforce the retroactive illusion of necessity. And is this like because when we are at this point in history, we just some things are unimaginable for us because we are caught in some kind of symbolic overarching necessity, and maybe this relates to the fact that like we
No,
no
I think I disagree with that. I think that would
okay
be that would be like Althusserian interpolation. I think his point is that this unknowability, it's not because of our subjects within this like uh like I don't know this system that totally interpolates us. It's rather that this uncertainty is an ontological condition of reality itself, and that things like identity uh and things like that are simply are, like what is untenable about like identity, such as Jacobins or like political identity. It's not that these things are untenable; it's that they try to deal with the untenability of reality as such.
yeah, you know what, I agree with you. I didn't mean like in the Althusserian ideological sense that we cannot because we are interpolated. I meant like so after the fall of Soviet Union, it seems to us that it was necessary and like nothing else could have happened. And this is yeah ontologically the symbolic is ontological, I think. So like this is like limiting our view because we cannot really determine what else could have happened. Like we cannot imagine it. Like we are like no, it had to fall because like the situation was dire and stuff. But maybe it didn't have to fall. Like we don't know.
And yeah, and we also tend to look at like we tend to look at like material circumstances to explain the reason why it fell. Whereas with Zizek, he goes a step further and he kind of like using like his knowledge, or not his knowledge, but the Hegelian knowledge, or the Hegelian reason as reality staging its own lack in order to become reality in the first place. So he uses this kind of as a hermeneutical tool to explain the necessity of the Soviet Union falling, not in terms of any material circumstances, but in the way that their like own theatrics, like within like the what was it called, the Stalinist trials or whatever, the way those their own staging of their ideology, what it revealed in what the gap between that and their stated beliefs in terms of dialectical materialism, that distance and the parallax between it is in itself like a politically valuable like tool, something to be, I don't know, to be learned from that experience, I suppose,
Hmm.
and applied in the future in a positive sense.
Oh yeah, so that would be connected with the continuous revolution thing. I think it's a way of coping also. Like it's not intentional, it's necessary, but like we say that like it had like some act took place and then it vanishes and we see that it's necessary, like it was necessary, but we also don't want to admit that like we have no idea, like we are in this symbolic necessity and in this way we are excused, and we could say that like no, it truly is necessary, and like maybe this necessity will be overwritten
Oh,
in the future, but like
I agree with that, and I think the way to kind of like thread the needle here is just to say, well, necessity is contingent, you know, so that way it kind of we can kind of like stay we can I think we kind of in a sense get the best of both worlds, but while leaving us without a world as well. Um, and I think that's pretty interesting.
Yeah,
Um,
let's go on.
yes.
Oh my god, where we ended.
Oh, you know what? This ties. I'll continue here because this ties right into the comment I just made. It is against this background that we must conceive Hegel's thesis on positing of presuppositions. This retroactive positing is precisely the way necessity arises out of contingency. The moment when the subject posits his presuppositions, when the Stalinists talk about their how the dialectical materialism puts them on the right side of history or whatever, uh, is the very moment of his effacement as subject, the moment he vanishes as a mediator, the moment of closure when the subject's active decision changes into its opposite, into the Stalinist show trials, establishes a new symbolic network by means of which history again acquires the self evidence of a linear evolution. Let us return to the October Revolution. Its presuppositions were posited when, after its victory and the consolidation of the new power, the openness of the situation was again lost, when it was again possible to assume the position of an objective observer and narrate the linear progression of history, of events, ascertaining how Soviet power broke the imperialist chain at its weakest link, and thus started a new epoch of world history, and so on. In this strict sense, the subject is a vanishing mediator. Its act succeeds by becoming invisible, by positivizing itself, and itself, it was an absence at first. It was a mimicry in a new symbolic network wherein it locates and explains itself as a result of historical processes, thus reducing itself to a mere moment of the totality engendered by its own act. Witnessed Stalinist position of pure meta language, where, contrary to the commonplaces about proletarian science, etc., the very engagement of Marxist theory on the side of the proletariat is partisanship, it's taking sides, is not conceived as something inherent to the theory as such. Marxists do not speak from the subjective position of the proletariat. They base their orientation on the proletariat from an external, neutral, objective position. Block quote here: in the 80s of the past century, in the period of the struggle between the Marxists and the Narodniks, the proletariat in Russia constituted an insignificant minority of the population, whereas the individual peasants constituted the vast majority of the population. But the proletariat was developing as a class, whereas the peasantry as a class was disintegrating. And just because the proletariat was developing as a class, the Marxists based their orientation on the proletariat. And they were not mistaken, for, as we know, the proletariat subsequently grew from an insignificant force into a first-rate historical and political force. And this quote, which Zizek is invoking critically, is by Joseph Stalin in his selected writings. The crucial question to be asked here, of course, is: at the time of their struggle against the Narodniks, where did the Marxists speak from to be subject to mistake in their choice of the proletariat as the basis of their orientation? Obviously, from an external point encompassing the historical process as a field of objective forces, a la Stalin up above, where one must be careful not to be mistaken and be guided by just forces, those that will win. In short, where one must bet on the right horse. Read this way, that is, retroactively, the decision on how to act follows the objective evaluation. First, we view the situation from a neutral, objective position. Then, after ascertaining which are the forces likely to win, we decide to base our orientation on them. And again, this is him invoking like Stalinism critically. He's not saying that we should do this. This retroactive narration, however, falls prey. I shouldn't have said that because he eventually immediately says that. He, however, falls prey to a kind of illusion of perspective. It misrecognizes the crucial fact that the true reason for deciding only becomes apparent once the decision has been taken. In other words, reasons for basing our orientation on the proletariat become apparent only to those who already speak from the proletarian subjective position, or, as perspicacious theologians would put it, of secondary in relation to the social as such.
No, 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 no,
In
no.
positivist sociology, as a subsystem by means of which society organizes its self regulation, in classical Marxism as the sphere of alienated universality, which results from society's class division, with the underlying implication that a classless society would entail the end of the political as a separate sphere. Even in the ideology of some of the new social movements, the political is delimited as the domain of state power, against which civil society must organize its self-defensive regulatory mechanisms. Against these notions, one could risk the hypothesis that the very genesis of society is always political. A positively existing social system is nothing but a form in which the negativity of a radically contingent decision assumes positive determinate existence. And
Listen, you lost me because I think either my you lost
so
me
I
on
think
the
this. Oh, please, please.
yeah, because when you were reading, you in the middle of the sentence
You know,
I
did I just like? I think I skipped a. I think I skipped an entire page.
you skipped like two
I'm
pages
so
and like
sorry.
yeah and
No, 2 pages. Yeah, I
I
don't know how
was
that
like
happened.
what the
I,
fuck.
you know what happened? I saw this. What is this on page 195? I saw this stupid square here, the Grimesian semiotic square, and I think I was just reading the Jameson essay, and I was so like eager to like flex again that I knew what this stupid square was.
And
That like I unconsciously just like flipped to that page. Okay.
dude, you made the best sentence in the world, like, or as perspicacious theologians would put it, of secondary in relation to the social. And my mind was like, what?
I'm so sorry. Okay,
That's
I
cool.
will
You can
I'll
read
start
from the.
right.
Yeah.
I'll, I'll start from the last sentence here of that page. That, in other words, reasons for basing our orientation on the proletariat become apparent only to those who already speak from the proletarian subjective position, or as perspicacious theologians would put it, of course there are good reasons to believe in Jesus, but these reasons are fully comprehensible only to those who already believe in him. And the same goes also for the famous Leninist theory of the weakest link in the chain of imperialism. One does not first ascertain via an objective approach which is this weakest link and then take the decision to strike at this point. The very act of decision defines the weakest link. This is what Lacan calls act. A move that, so to speak, defines its own conditions, retroactively produces grounds which justify it. The same way like the same way like traditionalists create the tradition by saying that it was lost.
It's
Um,
interesting
what is
how
it?
the. Oh, sorry. Oh, you read Lacan. Okay, okay.
Yeah. What is impossible for those who count on an objective appraisal of conditions is that a gesture could create conditions which retroactively justify it and make it appropriate. It is, however, attested that this is what happens, and that the aim is not to see things correctly, but to blind oneself sufficiently to be able to strike the right way, i.e., the way that disperses. It's a great quote.
Yeah.
Um,
Like, it's
I read so
interesting.
much right now. Would you?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
sorry,
no
please.
problem. Like, it's interesting how once you know that the subject is negativity all the time, like, what does the subject do? It picks something. It like makes a choice. It only like the place of the subject is only in pushing away something and like going the other way. Like the
Yeah,
positivity is always retroactive. That like then you
yeah, and the crazy
yeah
part, yeah,
yeah
the positivity is retroactive, but it's not even like illusory necessarily. I mean, it's illusory in the sense that it still produces something.
yeah.
Or yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and like it's so good. This point is so good about like w- from which place is Stalin talking from? Like it is as if the subject tried to erase itself by going out of the universe. Like no, no, I'm just reading the objective facts. Like and no one is speaking here. This connects to so many things. Like the to Lukács. Like all of Lukács is like subjective position is important and like it's a great. It was a great few
yeah.
paragraphs.
This this ties into one more second. Jameson in his essay on Weber. He actually uses that in a later essay, I think, on the destruction of reason.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I have to read more Jameson because I only read a few pages from the Torture House of Language. No, Prison House of
Prison
Language.
Prison house.
Yeah, actually, there's a
Yeah,
Zizek quote, like he's like torture house of language, and I was like,
I was exactly the same way. I was reading this essay. This was my first time reading him. I'd only heard him, and then so I was listening. I started listening to his lectures from like 1973 or something, and I just became so like enraptured by him that I decided just to start reading this Flaubert guy, this French
nice.
modernist, just so I can like understand what he's saying in these lectures. It was great. I recommend Three Tales, very short book.
Yeah, sure.
Anyways,
Let's
let's
continue.
continue. Yes.
The act is thus performative in a way which exceeds the speech act. Its performativity is retroactive. It redefines the network of its own presuppositions. This excess of the act's retroactive performativity can also be formulated in the terms of the Hegelian dialectics of law and its transgression, crime. From the perspective of the existing positive laws of a symbolic community, an act appears by definition as crime, since it violates its symbolic limits and it introduces an unheard of element which turns everything topsy turvy. There is neither rhyme nor reason in an act. An act is by its. That's a great quote to have on a t shirt. There is no rhyme, neither reason in an act. An act is by its very nature scandalous, as was the very appearance of Christ in the eyes of the keepers of the existing law. That is before Christ was Christianized, made part of the new law of Christian tradition. And the dialectical genesis renders visible again the scandalous origins of the existing law. Let us just recall again Chesterton's perspicacious remark about how the detective story keeps, in some sense, before the mind the fact that civilization itself is the most sensational of departures and the most romantic of rebellions. It is based on the fact that morality is the most dark and daring of conspiracies. The dialectical approach brings to the light of this forgotten reverse of law. The way law itself coincides with supreme criminal transgression. And an act succeeds the moment it sutures anew its own past, its own conditions, effacing its scandalous character. The act is the emergence of a new master signifier, that supplementary beat of your finger, which miraculously changes the previous chaos into new harmony. A beat of your finger on the drum discharges the sounds and begins the new harmony. A step by you, and new men arise and set on their march. Your head turns away, then you love. Your head turns back, then you love. Rimbo. What is lost after the onset of the new harmony is the radically contingent, scandalous, abyssal character of the new master signifier. Witness, for example, the transformation of Lenin into a wise figure who saw it all and foresaw it all. Stalinism included within the Leninist hagiography. This is why it is only today, after the breakdown of Leninism, that it becomes possible to approach Lenin as an actor in the historical drama, capable of making unforeseen moves that were, as Leszek Kołakowski put it so succinctly, the right mistakes at the right time. So this would like tie back to the so during Stalinism, I guess we couldn't imagine Lenin as the random dude who was doing like risky stuff, but now we can imagine possible worlds in which Lenin did some other stuff, maybe.
Mhm. Yeah, and the act of like suturing the master signifier, it relates directly to this conversation we had before of, obscenity, of, the continuation of the symbolic law requires self-exteriorization of that which was outside of the law into the law itself. It must identify itself as the law through this like act of turning Lenin into like this guy who saw it all or whatever. But and in a more like I don't know, allegorical sense, the way Zupancic puts it. I don't know if she's the first one, but they like there's that really funny joke. I said it's really funny, so now it's not gonna hit at all. And it's like, there are no more cannibals here. We just ate the last one yesterday. In order to define ourselves as non-cannibals, we had to eat the last cannibal and then pretend as if that didn't make us cannibals. Um,
That's a great joke.
yeah. Mhm.
I heard it too many times actually. But the so this also the point about law, like he keeps going back to the law, and so interesting. Like, so the original crime had to ratify itself. So this was the pure negativity of a crime, and then it had to ratify itself as law, or maybe the act of
Mhm.
um, bringing in the law is the crime itself. And
Yeah.
he's going to talk about it, I guess. But like, yeah,
I just like to point out if anyone is interested, this ties directly to a question I asked Todd McGowan in that live stream. Funny enough, I asked it in a pretty, I mean, as you can tell, I'm really like all over the place, but he was able to like relay it back to me in a more like coherent form than I actually posed it to him. Um, yeah.
it was a
You know,
great
how about
question, but it was very long. Like he,
mhm.
I was amazed that because it was great, but he has to have like this gigantic big brain moment because he was like, yeah, I can answer you immediately.
There must be a way where I could have just like in like 3 sentences just explained it really easily. But
I don't know.
you
Yeah.
let's see.
And
I'm just
you reminded me. So he talks about instituting a new master signifiers, which sutures it. But like McGowan was like, Hegel wants to institute a new quilting point, which would suture the field, and Marx wants to bring in a new master signifier. And like, I'm not sure I agree with this actually, but like the point is interesting in itself that like, because Alenka also in some book talked about like the political move is to bring in a new master signifier, and she talked about like Marx and class struggle, and like you can debate over like is class struggle a master signifier, but it's not empty, but like uh, it's he doesn't talk about like bringing in point de capiton, just a master signifier, and that's it. So
that was your question for him, right? If I
yeah,
recall correctly, you asked him about the quilting point.
yeah.
Mhm.
But I guess here it doesn't matter because the master signifier is just the moment when the subject like positivizes its own act. Yeah.
Okay. And then before we continue, I'll just pose. So we have one, two, three, 4 pages about, and we have, let's say, like 17 minutes.
We can stretch it
Um,
like we can do 28 minutes. It's fine.
okay, got it.
We'll make it.
Then just okay. Then in that case, let's just finish once we get to part two. Yeah, that
Ah,
sound good?
yeah. Now my first word is necessary symbolically. So what I said when we started the video.
I'm sorry, the big other hasn't. I haven't been notified by the big other to
Mm.
recognize that. So,
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
Uh, w- you just spoke, so I'm gonna go. Why is truth always political? This notion of the act immediately bears on the relationship between social and political, on the difference between the political and politics, as elaborated by Lefort and Leclau. That's 14 and 15, very short ones. Okay. The difference between politics as a separate social complex, a positively determined subsystem of social relations in interaction with other subsystems, economy, forms of culture, and the political, la politique, as the moment of openness, of undecidability, when the very structuring principle of society, the fundamental form of the social pact is called into question, in short, the moment of global crisis overcome by the act of founding a new harmony. The political dimension is thus doubly inscribed. It is a moment of the social whole, one among its subsystems, and the very terrain in which the fate of the whole is decided, in which the new pact is designed and concluded. I'm reading the footnote here. In Heideggerian terms, we could say that among the different spheres of social life, politics is the only place where truth can arrive, where a new way of a community discloses to itself to itself can be founded. Um, I think yeah, the can you go over the point you were making with Todd McGowan because I feel like that relates. That's very pertinent to what I just read with the quilting point.
Yeah, it is. Like, mm, but I don't think right now I can do it. Like the point about political is all over my mind, and yeah, let's just go on.
You mind if I take a moment just to read through
Yeah,
that last
yeah, go
paragraph?
on.
I don't think I really got to absorb it. So I think the quilting point is in a sense what kind of like mythologizes what accounts for like the mythologizing of the act itself, which established the master signifier. It's why it must necessarily be misunderstood.
Maybe it's like when you act and your act is political, like with the big P, then it quills the all of the social. So then you can positivize it
Mm.
and be like, okay, political is just a part of it, but like in the moment before you quilted
Yeah,
it
and
appeared
that's how
as
you yeah that's how
yeah.
I agree, and that's how you posit the social order as like
That's the
neutral.
mythologization. Yeah.
Yeah, Slavoj actually last chapter he did this distinction between subjective and objective. What is it?
Certainty.
Yeah, subjective and objective certainty, and this would be like a form of positing a false must be false objective certainty in order to kind of like quilt over this subjective certainty, which kind of like reveals like this obscene nature of the subject itself, which must be kind of repressed in order for the uh the symbolic order to kind of like be quilted. Yeah,
I don't know. It's like
I'm just spitballing here. I don't know
yeah,
either.
yeah, yeah. It's cool because when you said about subjective certainty, I was like, but wasn't it like those Wittgenstein, right? And like, I just don't think
I
it's
was, maybe I was confusing it.
yeah.
In Todd's essay, he refers to Zizek, who uses subjective and objective violence. Those
Hmm.
terms subjective violence would be like from the position of like of a subject within the current political order, pointing to particular crimes as these subjective crimes as a sort of like consolidating one's identity within the or like triangulating one's identity within the symbolic coordinates of our society, whereas objective violence is the violence necessary, the act which has to take place in order for this supposed neutrality against which the subjective violence can take place in the first place. My
Hmm.
point against Todd though
Hmm.
was that there's like there's a mediation that takes place within the official symbolic order itself, which is kind of like these unwritten laws and how to deal with like the obscenity of the violation itself. And I think that has to do with the subjective and objective certainty, and it's precisely like the moment or the like the double inscription. It's the inscription of not just the laws, but the laws of the lack of law itself.
Huh. Yeah, there is a that's a great question. Like when you asked it Todd, I didn't really get it, but now I'm like, okay, that's cool.
I'm more and more realizing that we're all kind of like we don't have like a full ability to like articulate what we want to say, but when I'm looking back and like listening to other people's questions and things like that, or reading their forum posts, there's like underneath it, there's like something very like there's something new and like very like I don't know, important to address that I think is will really help us all develop if we kind of like engage
You
with
know
each other.
why I got confused with the objective certainty? Because to me it was like subjective certainty is just your feeling that you are certain, and objective certainty is just the big order. So
Yeah,
it yeah, and like objective certainty is in a sense, oh yeah, it is law and the unwritten law. Yeah, you just do it. You just do it like that. Okay, yeah,
yeah, and
that makes sense.
it's important to notice so the redoubling here is that moment where like it's the law of the breaking of the law.
Mm-hmm,
Um,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
anyways, did I? Yeah, in social theory, I'm continuing. One usually conceives the political dimension as secondary in relation to the social as such. In positivist sociology, as a subsystem by means of which society organizes its self-regulation, in classical Marxism, as the separate sphere of alien. This is the part that I skipped to earlier, by the way.
Yeah.
Of alienated universality which results from society's class division, with the underlying implication that a classless society would entail the end of the political as a separate sphere. Even in the ideology of some of the new social movements, the political is delimited as the domain of state power against which civil society must organize its self defensive regulatory mechanisms. Against these notions, one could risk the hypothesis that the very genesis of society is always political. A positively existing social system is nothing but a form in which the negativity of a radically contingent capital D decision assumes positive, determinate existence. I think the conversation we just had uh, addresses this in a fine manner, so I'll continue. It was no accident that the Jacobins, those vanishing mediators par excellence, absolutized the political. The approach that they failed because they wanted to make of politics one of the social subsystems, the structuring principle of the entire social edifice, overlooks the crucial fact that with the Jacobins, the political dimension was not one subsystem among many, but designated the emergence of a radical negativity, rendering possible a new foundation of the social fabric. They vanish not because of their weakness, but because of their very success. That is, when their work was accomplished. In more semiotic terms, we could say that politics as subsystem is a metaphor of the political subject, of the political as subject, the element which, within the constituted social space, holds the place of the political as negativity which suspends it and founds it anew. In other words, politics as subsystem, as a separate sphere of society, rather than a foundational uh, principle of it, represents, that was my own note, within society its own forgotten foundation, its genesis in a violent abyssal act. It represents within the social space what must fall out if this space is to constitute itself as neutral. Here we can easily recognize the Lacanian definition of the signifier, that which represents the subject for another signifier. Politics as subsystem represents the political subject for all other social subsystems. This is why positivist sociologists desperately attempt to convince us that politics is just another subsystem. It is as if the very desperate and urgent tone of this persuasion echoes an imminent danger of explosion, whereby politics would again be all changed into political. There is an unmistakable normative relating to unwritten rules undertone to this persuasion, bestowing on it an air of conjuration. It must remain a mere subsystem. What is at stake in the two possible
Wait.
readings of the
Okay.
paradox of vanishing mediator?
Can we? Because this was like this
Yeah,
ties back to the Hegel's hysterical theater. So, let's say a form of consciousness like mm, immediate certainty. It represses the universality, and like this universality comes back as a symptom in no something, and like our
sure.
society has to repress the radical negativity, and it's kind of like yeah the positive sociologists have to just convince us once and again and again that this isn't just a positive subsystem because they know that this is like a kind of a this is the element which we have to repress in order to totalize the set of society, like in order to be
Sure.
like
And I think the moment, yeah, the moment of revolution is where these explanations no longer like hold any power when when the cannibal their corpse is being eaten over and over again and it's being staged publicly or something like that. When the unwritten laws themselves are being broken openly by like politicians, for instance, which I think characterizes our current political moment quite well. And in
yeah
this sense, I think actually you can think of like the '08 Democrats or whatever as sort of the vanishing mediators towards like these more like this more obscene politics of today, where in fact it's a credit to the politicians that they can openly disobey like laws and things like that. The way Donald Trump like he talks about being able to like shoot someone in the middle of like Wall Street or something and get away with it. Yeah.
yeah
But this stems from like this stems from like from like again the what was it, Guantanamo, like these arbitrary like torture prisons, the imprisonment of Julian Assange, which is in a sense like Antigone. It's like burning someone alive for
I was
yeah,
perplexed by Zizek saying like when I like few years ago I heard him say like he believes in appearances that like yeah liberals and republicans they do all the same stuff but liberals try to keep appearances and that this is important, and now I think maybe this is because it's the form, so like the form is trying to keep it not
mhm.
open, and like the Trump just takes this form and puts it away, and it's like, no, I'm now
Yeah,
off. Yeah,
he identifies with the breaking of the unwritten laws. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and this is why he's so unacceptable because
Well,
he,
no, in a sense, he is. That's why he's acceptable though, but unacceptable at the same time.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Well, this is where the symbolic law itself starts like stops making sense. Kind of, there's no like coherent way to kind of address this outside of kind of like as Zizek says, like pointing out how the space for him was made by like these earlier forms of politics, which, as you say, tried to maintain appearances, but they couldn't even do it because their own obscene enjoyment still like kind of broke through
yeah, 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 yeah,
and
yeah.
made the space for yeah.
He's acceptable
Um,
because the content is the same, but he's unacceptable because he goes against the liberal form.
yeah.
Maybe something like this. Yeah, let's go on. Oh, I can go on. Maybe. Where did we? What is at
Um,
stake in the like bottom of the page?
I see.
What is at stake in the two possible readings of the paradox of vanishing mediator is therefore the very status of social antagonism vis negativity. Is the emergence of negativity in the social space a mere intermediary in the passage from one form of positivity to another, the exception that characterizes the transition from one normality to another? Or is this very normality nothing but the aftermath, the gentrification of a forgotten excess of negativity? The second solution reverses the entire perspective. The stable network of subsystems is the very form of hegemony of one pole in the social antagonism. The class piece, the very index of the hegemony of one class in the class struggle. What is lost once the network of subsystems is stabilized, that is to say, once the new harmony is established, once the new order posits its presuppositions, structures its field, is the metaphoricity of the element which represents its genesis. This element is reduced to being one among others. It loses its character of one which holds the place of nothing, of radical negativity. This would go back to like you can from where are they, like when Stalin says about like class choosing the proletariat, from where is he talking about? And like when the positive sociologist says about like subsystems objectively existing, from what perspective is he talking about? From the bourgeois perspective or like liberal? You want to take this because you were excited about the square.
Sure, sure. Yes, I'd be delighted. Now we can return to the notorious Hegelian triad. The subject is this vanishing mediator, the fourth moment which, so to speak, enacts its own disappearance. By the way, this is like as you just made this point, like Stalinism is the point at which, it the initial crime, I guess, of Leninism, which regardless of what one's political orientation around, was absolutely, kind of whitewashed by Stalinism necessarily in order to maintain legitimacy. Sorry, I'll continue. Uh,
No, 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 it's cool.
the fourth moment, which, so to speak, enacts its own disappearance, whose disappearance is the very measure of its success. The void of self relating negativity, which becomes invisible once we look at the process backwards from its result. The consideration of this successive fourth moment at work in the Hegelian triad enables us to read it against the background of the Gramscian semiotic square. I'll try to explain this square in a more like a general form before going into its particulars. So in the top left, we have like necessary, which would be like a given term, and then we have like a negative s, which is its, or we have the top right, the impossible, which is its like a contradiction, like its contrary term, like negative s. But then below the on the bottom left, we have negative s bar, which means the disappearance of the top right term, its absence. So possible is the absence of impossible. And then on the bottom right, we have uh, the absence of the top left. So contingent as the absence of necessity, right? Um,
So wait,
anyways, I'll continue.
because you
The
did it in
opposition,
the you did it in the Lacanian symbols, right? Like subject, Bart subject, the negation of the Bart
I,
subject.
I use bar just as like basic like logical terms like
Oh,
negation and bar,
okay,
but
okay,
I don't think
okay.
that's Acadian.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Here
Because
actually,
yeah, yeah.
let me just send that. On page 14 of the PDF, you'll get a very clear explanation right under the image. Anyways, I'll continue reading.
Okay.
The opposition of necessity and impossibility dissolves itself into the domain of possibility. Possibility is, so to speak, the negation of necessity. It's the absence of impossibility, which is the negation of necessity. What disappears therewith is the fourth term, the contingent, which is in no way equal to possible. There is always something of an encounter with the real in contingency, something of the violent emergence of an unheard of entity that defies the limits of the established field of what one holds for possible, whereas possible is, so to speak, a gentrified, pacified contingency, a contingency with its sting plucked out. In psychoanalysis, for example, truth belongs to the order of contingency. See Jean-Claude Milner. We vegetate in our everyday life, deep into the universal lie that structures it, when, all of a sudden, some totally contingent encounter, a casual remark by a friend, an incident we witness, evokes the memory of an old repressed trauma and shatters our self-delusion. Psychoanalysis is here radically anti-Platonic. The universal is the domain of falsity par excellence, whereas truth emerges as a particular contingent encounter which renders visible its repressed. Um, I'll read the footnote. As with Hegel, where words as such belong to the domain of abstract understanding and are therefore incapable of giving expression to speculative truth, this truth can emerge only by means of particular contingencies of wordplay. Yeah, okay. And then
So for
the
Hegel, the
dimension lost.
universal. So for I wonder if for Hegel the universal is also the domain of falsity. It's interesting.
Pardon me?
Sorry, because I forgot the mic.
No, no, please, please.
Yeah, I wonder if for Hegel also the universal is the domain of falsity, because like it's interesting.
It's the domain of falsity, which must be posited in order for like the continuation of the last three moments via this like the cementing of its positive structure of like for instance within a revolution the turning of living labor the switch from living labor into dead labor of institutions. um I'll continue. The dimension lost in possibility is precisely this traumatic, unwarranted character of the emergence of truth. When a truth becomes possible, it loses the character of an event. It changes into a mere factual accuracy and thereby it becomes part of the ruling universal lie. There's a long footnote here. In the present ideological constellation, when the glorification of postmodern culture at the expense of modern civilization is again fashionable, the German culture against the allegedly superficial Anglo-Saxon or French civilization, etc., it would be theoretically productive to arrange into a semiotic square the two oppositions of culture primitivism and of civilization barbarism. The crucial point not to be missed here is that culture and barbarism do not exclude each other. The opposite of barbarism is not culture, but civilization, i.e., non civilized equals barbaric. In other words, culture in itself, insofar as it is affirmed in its opposition to civilization, sets free and unmistakable barbaric potential. It was already Hegel who, apropos of the medieval culture of alienation, spoke of the barbarism of pure culture. The fact that the greatest barbarism of our century, Nazism, took place within the nation which glorified its culture against the superficial civilization of its neighbors is by no means accidental. There is ultimately no contradiction between Heinrich Heydrich, who directed the Nazi terror in occupied Bohemia and planned the final solution of the Jewish question, and the same Heydrich who, in the evening after the hard day's work, played with friends Beethoven's string quartets, perhaps the supreme achievement of German culture. I'm also thinking here of like Benjamin Franklin like writing about like freedom while his slaves like right outside his window working for him. But whatever.
Edgy point,
The
yeah,
first
yeah.
mod Yeah, the first model of this German Kulturbarbarismus is Luther, whose Protestant refusal of Rome presents a reaction of pure inner culture against the worldly Catholic civilization, and at the same time, by means of its savage, violent attitude, displays the latent barbarism proper to the German ideology. Would you care to finish us off here?
Sure. We can see now how far Lacanian psychoanalysis is from the pluralist pragmatic liberalism of the Rortian kind. Lacan's final lesson is not relativity and plurality of truths, but the hard, traumatic fact that in every concrete constellation, truth is bound to emerge in some contingent detail. In other words, although truth is context dependent, although there is no truth in general, but always a truth of some situation, there is nonetheless in every plural field a particular point which articulates its truth and as such cannot be relativized. In this precise sense, truth is always one. What we are aiming at here comes to light more clearly if we replace the ontological square with the deontological one. And everyone can see it basically on the screen. So prescribed would be okay. He talks about it. We even no, he doesn't talk about it. Okay, necessary would be prescribed. Prohibited is impossible. Permitted is possible, and we don't have a name for contingency in the ethical sense. We even lack an appropriate term for this X for the strange status of what is not prescribed, facultative, and yet not simply permitted. Like, for example, the emergence of some hitherto forbidden knowledge in the psychoanalytic cure, which holds up to ridicule the prohibition, lays bare its hidden mechanism, without thereby changing into a neutral permissiveness. The difference between the two pertains to the different relationship towards the universal order. Permissiveness is warranted by it, whereas this guarantee lacks in the case of you may something, which Lacan designates as I don't know how to read silicate. You may know the truth about your desire if you take the risk upon yourself. The silicate is perhaps the ultimate recourse of the critical thought.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that the X would be the unwritten law, but it's not. It's the truth, actually. It's interesting.
Well, the truth of non-relation, which must be mediated by the unwritten laws, which are unwritten. Therefore, they can't be. There's no appropriate term for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The point about truth is because I never he probably needs it in order to not sound. So this is the problem of like vulgar Marxism. Like they think the truth is one and it's not context dependent. But we have a truth of the history and it's the rise of the proletariat and like I never knew what is the status of truth in Lacan, but now I am like okay.
Yeah, Zizek uses this to great effect too, to kind of reinvigorate like certain aspects of Marxism, like his definition of class struggle, the way he in particular forecloses dictatorship of the proletariat. The famous in the beginning of Sublime Object, his whole point with commodity fetishism. Uh, yeah.
Commodity. Oh, applying this to commodity fetishism. This would be awesome. Yeah, this chapter is like really great because he's like tying this all the way back and like just we are going into the history, so it's amazing. And like we'll see what will be in the second part, I guess. Do you have any like final comments, or are we going just to cut it?
It's really interesting to see the way that we kind of like weave a web while we're doing this of a kind of like our own sort of understanding, which doesn't. It's not like a summary of what he says, but in a sense, I think we're getting like, in trying to like talk to each other, especially in my case, like a baby trying to ask its mother for something. In my case, I'm asking for myself to kind of produce some knowledge. It's interesting to see how we actually do come to a better understanding of this, especially with the way it kind of ties into things we've written about and understood before.
This is basically the torture house of Zizek.
Yeah.
We are twisting the dude. That's cool. Okay,
Mhm.
so let's.
It was a pleasure.
Yeah, wait.